Hey everyone, Marilynn Hughes, the Out of Body Travel Foundation. Today on Tales of the Mendicant Fathers, we are going to learn a little bit about what the Patristic Fathers had to say about heaven. This is coming from the Westminster Handbook to Patristic Theology by John Anthony McGuckin. And it's an excellent summarization of what those preachers taught about heaven. Christian theology significantly changed earlier Jewish speculation on the nature of heaven, largely by simplifying and democratizing it, and certainly by rooting all speculation about it through the eschatological understanding of the resurrection of Christ. Biblical thought had conceived the heavens as the proper dwelling place for God and his angels. Jacob looked up and saw the passage of the heavenly beings from the heavenly regions to earth, and God could be conceived as coming down from heaven to Sinai. Jesus passed on this general conception to his church, as, for example, in the way he habitually looked up to heaven in order to pray and addressed God as our Father in the heavens. Jewish thought at the time of the New Testament had envisaged 7 layers to heaven. In the highest heaven was God alone, surrounded by the seraphim who veiled him from all other creation. Their proximity to the divine majesty was so intense that they had burst into flame as they circled the divine glory. In the lower heavens were the cherubim and archangelic powers. The first heaven was that heavenly domain visible to mortal perception. Not exactly the skies, but rather the upper sphere, where the angels still battled all the hostile spiritual powers who congregated there to influence earthly destinies. It was one of the powerful early Christian claims that Christ's resurrection victory had been felt in that sphere, the overcoming of hostile energies, a victory that meant the spiritual liberation of the souls of the just, and a safe passage won for them in the time when their own souls had to make the awesome journey from this earthly sphere to the heavenly regions. This journey of the soul was a central cause of concern in Hellenistic religions too, especially the mystery cults. Interesting, huh? And part of Christianity's great appeal in the earliest generations was that it democratized the possibility of access to heavenly life in Christ. Paul refers to the scheme of a variety of heavens, incidentally, when he mentions the man caught up into the third heaven, where he received divine inspirations. And it was also used as vivid testimony to the unique significance of Christ's risen glory, that he had thereby ascended beyond all the heavens. The earliest catacomb art shows Christians imagine the entrance of the just into heaven as a refrigerium and an enjoyment of otium, a pleasantly cool enjoyment of delights such as the paradisical banquet, the messianic banquet mentioned in the parables, and especially rest from labor. Paradise was frequently evoked as an image of heaven that appealed to the restoration of the beautiful garden of delights lost to Adam. Scenes of children are common where they play in a carefree way in peaceful meadows. 3rd century funeral inscriptions speak of the dead as living now in Christ, or refreshed and joyful among the stars. The tension exhibited in several of the earliest Christian sources between a judgment immediately after death and one in the distant future was generally reconciled, certainly after the 4th century, by a common belief among the Christians that the just would be welcomed by Christ soon after their death. In parts of the early Syrian church, the dominant belief in the future resurrection was taken to mean the dead would lie in a dreamless sleep until the last day, when they would be called to judgment before being admitted to paradise or consigned to Hades. The two concepts, survival or final restoration of consciousness, were generally reconciled by the 4th century, and Augustine's synthesis of them, an individual judgment anticipates the last judgment, became standard in the West after the 5th century. The Christians were generally insistent against contrary Gnostic teachings that the body was good and would have a part in the risen life in heaven. Even Origen taught that traditional doctrine of a risen body, which would be identifiable with this present one, although elsewhere he maintained a more spiritualizing view of the transfiguration involved in heavenly life. He spoke of it in De Principiis as something that would come together. The body in heaven would not be the same as this corporeal body, but emanate from it, as wheat did from the germ. After the decisive rejection of Origen's ideas on a radically spiritualized heavenly body in the 4th century, and again in the 6th century, the church generally presumed a greater corporeality of the heavenly saints than Origen had envisaged. Though Paul's paradoxical image of the spiritual body in 1 Corinthians 15 always served as a brake on those who wanted to make it a thoroughly corporeal vision. Notions of the ongoing perfection involved in the heavenly life, transitions from glory to glory, and the potentiality of an even higher communion with God were dominant in the Cappadocian Fathers and other later Origensians, such as Maximus, the Confessor. And so they never wholly left Christian speculation on the heavenly life. The precise details of what constituted the heavenly life were supplied often by popular preaching. But theological speculation had been cautioned by Paul from an early time, and Christians took it to heart that it was fundamentally, this is what I want you to think again on, this is your contemplation moment, what no eye has seen, no ear heard, no mind conceived, what God has prepared for those who love him. 1 Corinthians 2:9. I'll say that again. This is our contemplation point. The conclusion is that heaven is fundamentally what no eye has seen, no ear heard, no mind conceived, what God has prepared for those who love him. 1 Corinthians 2:9. That was St. Paul's words. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.